Welcome back to the Mentor Roulette grind. This time, we're playing Summoner on a Monday evening in the first weekly lockout of the Mock Tome event. I hope you're excited, because this set was something else. With that said, for Duty 1, we start with Fist of the Father. As Alexander is on the menu for the Mock Tome event, Fist of the Father, or A1N, is considered one of the faster ways to farm the tomes, especially if you can get blue mages. But just queuing for it is also decent. Due to the level range, the best I can do for maximum damage is making sure I'm auto-attacking. On the boss itself, a general tip for safety is that the remaining boss only starts casting self-destruct once the other boss is dead. So if you try your best to attack the one with more HP at all times, not all jobs can do this without a damage loss. You can ensure they go down close enough to each other. However, if your group has so much damage that the first boss dies before the second boss is targetable at all, usually, you should also have enough burst to kill the second one in time. However, should that not be the case, good luck. For Duty 2, we went to Friendly Castles, and it turns out Max knew me. Hello! Aside from that, not much happened here. In fact, due to the level range, I didn't even have AoE, and due to how fast the mobs die, Ruby Ruin felt rather silly to use as well. For Duty 3, we went to Thordan Extreme, and it turned out Blaine knew me. Hello! Note that no one left the group. However, this is a lot more funny of an observation once you realize that several of the party members didn't even realize it was Extreme until later in the fight. I will say, it is shocking no one noticed, considering the initial phase 1 has a bunch of things happening which is still wilder than on normal. As we jump to the intermission, I invite you to the cleanest Thordan Extreme you'll ever see. Wink. First, we have the chains and pillar soaks, which go just fine, leading into Sacred Cross, which was also simple. After that, we have the 3 dragoons dashing across. This one is a lot harder, because it can be hard to eye where the safe spots are, and getting hit, well, kills pretty much anything that isn't a tank outright. This leads to us getting into the Janleno and Adelfeld section with nearly half the rate down. In this section, try to make sure you always attack the one with the damage buff, sword, and not the damage reduction, shield. Also, take note that the Holy Blade Dance hits incredibly hard over multiple hits, although it hits so fast that hardly matters. The blue circle marker that appears on players are proximity AoEs to run away with, and sometimes the knights will cast raid wives. Being put in a situation where one of the knights is nearly dead but has the shield effect can be a problem, as killing it will vastly weaken the remaining knight by taking away its damage buff, but it can be hard to break through the damage reduction. After this, we have the ice AoEs with the 3 line AoEs. As what immediately follows is a knockback, it is often a good idea to try to clump together the ice AoEs a bit so there is better space for getting knocked safely. However, the ice debuff is survivable and can be removed with the Shuna. What follows after that is the Meteor Impact section, where some players get pelted with damage back to back, and if a DPS still has the ice debuff from before, they will probably die. It would probably look a little something like this. An interesting thing to note about this section is that the smaller Meteor Impacts are apparently survivable. However, the center one is not, so if things go sideways, it can be a huge issue if time is wasted on side meteors that don't get stopped anyway, although you might only be able to survive one, come to think of it. However, we just barely make it. Then we have the ultimate end, which weirdly gives us some breathing room. During phase 2, there will be a huge eye watching the arena that will move around the outer edge every so often. Whenever Thordan uses a gaze mechanic, that eye will count as an additional source of the gaze, so you have to look away from both. This will be a problem multiple times throughout. Now, for the first mechanic, a healer will be stunned, and afterwards a wild charge type line stack will target that healer. Essentially, if anyone dies as a result of the wild charge, it leads to an immediate wipe. So, once the healer is stunned, the off-tank and as many players as possible line up. Tank in front, and everyone else behind but in front of the stunned healer. It is survivable with as little as 4 players with a bit of mitigation and barrier help, alongside Echo. Take note that getting hit by any gaze mechanic will cause you to run randomly, and running randomly into the outer ring of the arena will spell death for most players. The way the big eye is normally dealt with is by simply moving Thordan over to the eye, so that looking away from Thordan amounts to looking away from the eye. The second mechanic involves 4 pillars to be soaked, combined with a wave pattern cone AoE, which happens to coincide with, ding ding, a gaze mechanic. However, missing a pillar doesn't hurt that much, although the paralysis it applies is a problem. Shortly after that, black circle AoEs appear, and immediately after that, a stack marker. And just as the stack marker is about to resolve, a knockback is applied, so you need to not stack at the edge either, and you also have to make sure you get knocked in the same direction. At this point, we're down to 2 tanks and a healer, and one of our DPS has disconnected, so we don't even have healer limit break, and even if we did, some players would just drop dead again from the edge. The next mechanic involves spread markers followed by a proximity AoE on one player and a line AoE on another player, which immediately leads into tank busters. I conclude, as I get targeted for the line, that my best course of action is to immediately raise someone else before I die again, and so the cycle continues. As we start to recover a bit, chains come out, followed by me looking at the gaze again and going down. But hey, I raised someone before that at least. Once we get sort of back on track, the next mechanic is a bunch of raid wides followed by Sephirot covering Thordan for Sacred Cross again. We don't quite get him down all the way before Sacred Cross, but we survive. And despite everything, in the end, we all stand tall with a first try Thordan Extreme clear. And absolutely insane performance, especially by the tanks and healers. For Duty 4, we went to Adventurer in the whole shield, and it seems the tank might have been a first timer. But they were listening to chat, it seems at least, so no failure. Quick and easy. For Duty 5, we went to Pushing Toxic Posers, and it is the same tank, and it seems like they don't quite understand how to deal with AoE. I strongly considered explaining to them, but I feel that a longer, more proper duty would be a better time to teach them, so hopefully they'll get around to that later. For Duty 6, we go to a Dawntrail raid, so timestamp if you want to skip. That said, we went to M2N with what appears to be 2 first-timers. As some of you have mentioned to me, it makes sense to get this raid tier in Mentor Roulette on a Monday, since there are the last clears that need people, but if there are first-timers, then that can of course also be a reason. In the opener, I choose to hold my Searing Light since we had another summoner. Initially, I used mine right after theirs, but after that point, I realized it would have been better to use it on the odd minute to boost in a damage spike rather than in the filler. Around the middle of the fight, both healers had gone down once each, meaning they might be running on fumes for a while. Once we get to the classic Alarm Pheromones one, or the Chaos one on normal, a bunch more go down, but we manage to keep the team stable and work our way to the end. For Duty 7, we go to A4N, Manipulator. Interestingly, the many downtime sections in this fight are very convenient for summoners since at this level, the only real big high point in my rotation is Dreadworm Trance. In fact, even with the downtime, I could usually make it through my 3 summons fully without delaying Dreadworm Trance. Goes to show how much Rune 3 spam is in this level range. I was expecting deaths when Judgment Nisi came out, as both healers were standing quite close, but Evandros managed to step away just before the mechanic resolved on them. I was already moving my fingers to Swiftcast arrays too. That said, the run went smoothly. For Duty 8, we went to Ultima Weapon Extreme, and it turned out Resenas knew me. Hello! Ultima Weapon Extreme is quite an interesting fight, because it has several HP thresholds, which means that with the power creep and damage we can do now, we often speed run through mechanics, which often makes the fight easier and more manageable when the damage is lower in a weird way. From personal observation, there is a threshold where it drops Garuda, drops Ifrit, drops Titan, and performs Aetheric Boom 1, 2, and 3. Most of the first half of the fight is very manageable, even in speed mode like this, but Aetheric Boom is the one mechanic that tends to catch groups off guard. Case in point, we wiped to the 3rd Aetheric Boom because no one made it to the last orbs in time. For the second attempt, since I now know that Resenas, at the very least, knows what to do among the DPS, and any 2 players can take an orb together, I decide to stick to them so at least we can do it if needed. It ends up not being necessary, and we easily get through on this attempt. We even had a tank switch. For Duty 9, I was an instant replacement for Sephirot Extreme. We meet again. Also look, Mir, the summoner from the M2N run is here. Aster, who is a sprout in the squad, took it upon themselves to lead in terms of mechanics. Personally, I could have explained it too, but since they already started, I let them. Throughout this session, they acted as pseudo-raid leader all the way. However, there were two minor gripes I had with that I just want to highlight as advice for anyone else that ends up in Asta's position. The first one is that if you want to be the lead in this kind of situation, riding quickly is almost a requirement. If you can't do that, a way you can go about it too is using macros so you have the mechanics explained beforehand. You could also just have a document to copy from. Although, this is difficult if you're on console, I think. Although, this was a very minor gripe, and not something that was a real issue, so to speak. The real gripe was that multiple times throughout the session, Asta would be writing long sentences in the middle of the fight, and sometimes it would lead to them not being in position for mechanics. Sometimes it made sense because what they said was tactical information, but, you know, keep it short. Remember to cast stone if you have that much time. Anyway, let's get to the actual duty then. We started with Asta explaining essentially everything in Phase 1. I then mentioned the flashing floor for Phase 2, as that one would probably wipe us immediately otherwise. Our first attempt goes sideways immediately as the stack markers are not quite done properly, and so we talk that over a bit more. For the second attempt, we make it all the way to the triple knockback and even past that, although we didn't have the capacity to recover, although we might have if healer limit break came out on time. Ah well. After that, Asta explains most of the Phase 2 mechanics, and it takes so long that some players start to get impatient, so we sort of jump ahead to the triple knockback mechanic and briefly explain it. On attempt 3, we have a few deaths because of a misunderstanding with the beams and the green and orange debuffs, but somehow still make it just barely past the triple knockbacks with a skeleton crew. On attempt 4, we had some issues with the pillars after the debuffs go down, and it turns out a summoner with radiant aegis can take it and live. We make it past the triple knockbacks and I start raising healers, however, then we make it to the big push with the Storm of Words, and neither of the healers were prepared for it, so we're back to just one lone summoner that can raise. But we get overwhelmed. We briefly explain the triple knockback thing again. You have to wait away from the spot you want to stand on until the floor flashes, then you can go. And we start to go a bit more fast and loose with the attempts because we are running out of time at this point. Now we also have so much echo that we can skip most of Phase 1. Unfortunately, we lose both healers in Phase 2, and while I try to get them up, they went down again too fast for me to keep it up, so we quickly wipe out. For attempt 6, I barely don't make it to the left pillar, so all the green debuff players go down, which is a problem. I think part of what went wrong here is that all 4 players that got the orange debuffs were used to someone else running left, and so only the summoner with the short legs was sprinting for it. I should have been able to make it, but didn't realize the problem fast enough. And then we just dive right into attempt 7 immediately as time is running out. Let's take it from the top. Both stack markers are taken with no deaths, Leo takes the tank busters just fine, and phase transition. The tanks nicely share the burden of the adds, with one taking the big guys and one taking the small guys. No danger at all. Phase 2 begins, and the floor flashes, and everyone gets out of the way. Debuffs are handed out, no deaths to the half-room cleaves. Asta announces he would take right pillar, and Mir has been taking the left pillars the entire session, so we can assume they would. The green beams come, and I start by making sure my beam is passed off before I run to safety. All beams are accounted for. Now, despite me knowing Mir would run for it, this time I also immediately sprint for the left pillar, and then change course when I see Mir's ahead of me anyway. Another half room, and everyone is still alive. Then we have the 2 baited cone AoEs that coincide with a floor flash. Avoidable damage is taken, but we live. Everyone survives the green blasts, and another pair of pillars. Yet another half-room cleave, and here comes a triple knockback. And because of where we decide to stand for the half-rooms, several pillars will happen where we want to stand. Elwyn goes down, but the rest of the raid is still alive. We can recover. 2 players fall off the arena, but we still have a healer and a summoner with Swiftcast, so this is still doable. Another pair of cone AoEs and another floor flash into another set of pillars. Yet another half-room cleave. Our Pixelmancer goes down as the big pushback is readied. Asta just barely falls off, and Watchy suggests limit break. At this point, a DPS limit break on Sephirot might be exactly what we need. I'm focused on dealing with the Storm of Words, but Icarus knows what to do the moment the adds are dead. And Sephirot goes down. What a fight. Full echo, and it still got so far down to the wire that at best we had one more attempt up our sleeve before time would be short. And we even managed to skip the knock-up with the Storm of Words. Well done to the team. Oh yeah, the mount dropped as well. And finally for duty 10, we have Ravana Extreme. And look, Watcher is here again. Ravana, being one of the early expansion extremes, is a lot easier to handle, and while some of the mechanics are slightly meaner compared to normal, the actually different stuff that really matters starts coming up in the latter half of the fight, which is mostly skippable due to power creep. The first significant mechanic is the seeing something directional parry, as it both hurts but also puts attack speed slows on attackers, although only melee attackers, haha. After that, we have Prelude to Liberation, which is just a circle AoE. Then the line AoEs with very large spread markers, although apparently you can survive 2 of them. Then we have Actual Liberation, which is more like a 270-degree frontal cone attack. Just get behind him. This one goes a bit different, where he does a handful of circle AoEs, which, again, you can apparently survive a few. This is immediately followed by each clone doing a line AoE in front of them, so get out of the way. This takes out both healers, but we have 2 summoners, so it is probably fine. Warlord Shell comes next, which is a DPS check. If the barrier isn't broken in time, Ravana gets a damage boost and does a massive raid-wide attack that tends to kill anything that isn't a tank without extra mitigation help. Once this is dealt with, we have the butterfly phase. Simply kill them as normal, and Bloody Fuller happens. Different from normal though, most of the outer wall is broken by this attack immediately, so it is important to take note of what is behind you. Pillars of Heaven is a knockback and takes out one of our tanks. Immediately after, Ravana shoots a Wind Blast at a marked player, which I believe is a stack, but it also breaks the wall. After that, he uses Serpenaka once, seemingly, and then swaps phase, but before he can bring Swift Liberation, we take him down first, ironically. An incredibly intense set this time around. This is also the first time I've beaten both Sephirot and Thordan Extreme in Mentor Roulette, so that's really nice. Although, I already knew beforehand that Sephirot Extreme can be beaten with 5 players, possibly 4, Thordan can be beaten with only 4 players, and Ravana can be beaten with as little as 3. Oh, and Ultima Weapon Extreme can be taken down with just 2. I will put links to the streams where I demonstrated these things in the description. In the case of Thordan, I think the big takeaway is that most of the fight isn't a very tight DPS check, so as long as you can stay alive, it is manageable. Compare that to Sephirot, who has rather regular body checks and just keeps slapping you with AoEs. It can be very, very hard to recover once people start dropping if you aren't ready for it. It is worth noting that I don't think we would have done Sephirot in time if it wasn't for the fact most of the team learned reasonably quickly. Now, that is all for this video. Thank you so much for watching. If you would like to support me and my channel more directly, you can become a member like these wonderful people here. You can also alternatively support me through Ko-Fi, link in the description. You can also support the channel by letting the YouTube algorithm know by liking the video, leaving a comment, subscribing, sharing, and hitting the bell to get notified when next I post a video. Fun fact, back at the start of Endwalker when Summoner was initially reworked, Phoenix was objectively weaker than Bahamut, as the filler attacks for Phoenix did the same damage as Bahamut, but Bahamut had Death Flare, Phoenix had Rekindle. This meant reaching level 80 effectively nerfed Summoner's damage by only getting half as many Bahamuts. This was quickly rectified by adding 100 extra potency to it, as this would even things out. With Dawntrail, however, Fountain of Fire only gets a 40 potency boost, where Astral Impulse gets 60, so the difference is smaller now, making Phoenix just barely weaker than Bahamut again. Strange.